Is it okay to be a Luddite? Why are so many writers neo-luddites? Well, what is going on to all my Thomas Pynchon fans? Because today we are going to be doing a deep dive analysis into Thomas Pynchon's essay, Is It Okay to Be a Luddite? And Pynchon's essay builds upon Charles P. Snow's lecture, Intellectuals as Natural Luddites. And I'm going to link Pynchon's and Snow's essay and lecture in the description down below, because I feel like at times Pynchon assumes that we have read Snow before and leaves out some key details that can prevent us from understanding his full thesis. And so what is Pynchon's initial argument? Well, in Snow's lecture, he makes the distinction between two types of individuals, the literary and the scientific factions. But when you outright hear that, you probably are thinking like the engineer types and then the professor in the ivory tower. But Snow kind of throws not just all the scientists and the thinkers into the scientific faction, but also the workers. Because Snow writes that if there was any thinking in the 19th century industry, it was left to cranks and clever workmen. Sometimes handymen like Henry Ford with a dash of genius, and that's him kind of being an elitist. But Snow is not necessarily talking about, once again, scientific types. But back in the 19th century, during kind of the industrial revolutions across the United States and countries in Europe, there was a divide between the handymen, the workmen, the people participating in the Industrial Revolution and fueling it, and the intellectuals. When you think of Whitman, Emerson, Thoreau, and a lot of other 19th century novelists and thinkers, some of them did have the people in their heart. Some of them, were advocates for those causes, but they weren't participating and helping kind of fuel those causes. So there was a kind of a very stark contrast between the two sides. But Pynchon argues, if we kind of go to modern times, and he writes this essay in 1984, and what he says is somewhat more relevant than ever. And he argues that because of access to information and transparency, and if you get on the internet, you can hop on a shadow library and read about anything. And because of that, anyone can participate in more of the intellectual, humanities, social science angles and arguments of life, but also, the industrial, the scientific, more logical, whatever we want to call it, aspects of life. And there are authors, like my favorite example of this is Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy was a stonemason and built his own house by hand. He was obviously a great novelist, great writer, great thinker, but for the last 4.5 decades of his life, he was only hanging out with Nobel Prize winning physicists and really smart scientists. And he had this really deep interest in science. And he really embodies what Snow writes right here. And Snow says, quote, "The thesis put forward," and this is Snow's thesis, "that a gap between the humanist and the technologist is, on the whole, still valid and up to the point. Perhaps it should be complemented by the observation that not only the practitioner of the humanities still do not fully understand science and technology, but also many scientists and technologists are not very keen on exploring and appreciating the humanities. Perhaps this gap can be overcome only when intellectual and manual activities intersect and mingle in the life of everybody on a daily basis." But Pynchon wants to know, how do we deal with this in 2024? Because back in the day, writers and intellectuals were pushed into becoming natural Luddites. They, just because of the divorce and the gap between them and the other, and that is like the technologists and the people working in factories, became anti-technology. And Pynchon writes that, quote, "Except for maybe Brainy Smurf, it's hard to imagine anybody these days wanting to be called a literary intellectual, though it doesn't sound so bad if you broaden the labeling to say people who read and think. Being called the Luddite is another matter. It brings up questions such as, is there something about reading and thinking that would cause or predispose a person to turn Luddite? Is it okay to be a Luddite? And come to think of it, what is a Luddite anyway?" And so let's just really fast answer, what is a Luddite? Well, the official definition is a person opposed to new technology or ways of working. But the classical definition, and the one that Pynchon is going to be talking about, is a member of any bands of English workers who destroyed machinery, especially in the cotton and woolen mills that they believed was threatening their jobs from 1811 to 1816. And one more definition I want to throw out, which is going to be more relevant to us in this conversation and, in applying this to 2024, is neo-luddism, which is kind of a pejorative term used, or to call people who have anti-technology leanings. And so there's a lot of people who kind of embody this. We have deep ecologists, people who are like primitivists, people who are off the grid, who want simple living, who are moving away from technology, or like want to ban AI or social media. Like there are many different things, but I think this also extends, and this is maybe where we get into sketchy territory with some of you guys. I feel like many writers, because that's who we're talking to here. If you care about Thomas Pynchon, you are one of these literary intellectuals, someone who reads and thinks and is probably one of the more intelligent people in your social group or at your job or whatever. But what I've noticed as someone who has been in this game in academia for 8 years, on YouTube, talking with writers, with my audience every single day, is that there are a lot of writers who are neo-luddites and ludtards, as I call them. And I'll give a small preview of my spiel on this for later. But ludtards refuse to learn technology or engage in digital spaces online as a writer because they believe in the old way. They believe in the elitist attitude that many writers held, that you can just go send your work out into a random slush pile and it may get published. And any mention of writing on Substack or trying to maybe market your work or like create any type of an audience blows their brain up. And their main argument is they don't want to use technology, that they don't like that, yada, yada, yada. But when you look at rappers or any other form of artist, they're not neo-luddites. They are more than happy to shoot a music video, to do an interview, to do a dumb photo shoot for Instagram or whatever. But writers and thinkers, for some reason, which we're going to explore in this essay, veer toward being ludtards. And Pynchon gives us the backstory on Ned Ludd, broke into a house and destroyed machines used for knitting. And eventually, later on, it kind of gained its own persona. And by the time the Luddites came around, they claimed allegiance to this King Ludd guy and assumed this archetypal persona that at night when, it was the witching hour, they would go out in these feats of rage and destroy machinery. And Pynchon writes on this archetypal energy by saying, quote, "There is a long folk history of this figure, the badass. He is usually male, and while sometimes earning the quizzical tolerance of women, is almost universally admired by men for two basic virtues. He is bad and he is big. Bad meaning not morally evil necessarily, more like being able to work mischief on a large scale. What is important here is the amplifying of scale, the multiplication of effect." And what machinery, still to this day does, is that it not just replaces humans, but it represents a certain amount of capital and a certain amount of humans. If it can do the work of 100 people and be functioning 24 hours a day, it assumes a worth and a value in comparison with humans. And after enough time of this, after enough comparison and competition, resentment starts to flow. And Ned Ludd, gained nationwide prominence, as Pynchon says, because he went against these more than human opponents and prevailed. And that's the root of all of our stories, the superhero story, all these things, that there's this opponent that none of us can feel like we can conquer. But what if someone does? And these machines, these laws and codes, and even today, imagine the zeal we would have and how great it would feel if we did take back parts of our economy, if we did start going outside again and resisting the machines and social media and technology and shut down Meta and Alphabet and all the other major corporations. That has now become our fantasy, and it's so much more intense now. And Pynchon tells a wonderful story that I've never heard before, that Lord Byron gave a speech to make frame breaking, destroying, the technology punishable by death. But in 1816, when he was going crazy, still on the Luddites, he was hanging out in Mary and Percy Shelley's house, talking to them while Mary was working on Frankenstein. And what's funny is that, Pynchon argues that Frankenstein is a Luddite book, that, it's a story about what happens when technology gets out of hand. And I would like to make just a quick assertion on this. I actually have a free writing on this over on the Substack, where I explore Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, I think probably over like 4,000 words. But the main thesis I kind of postulated over there was that Frankenstein is a novel about creativity. We have Victor, who creates Frankenstein, and he keeps rejecting it. He pulls it out of his unconscious. He is this absolute genius. He has, brought life back from the dead. And all of his problems stem from the fact that he keeps rejecting Frankenstein. And it leads to the death of his wife. And he also doesn't want to connect back to the feminine because at one point in the story, the creature, asked to let him have a female companion so that he can go and experience happiness. Victor is given this chance at redemption. And this is what happens when you reject your own creativity. And I would say that this is why there are so many of these issues now with people online and with writers and with the intellectualization of everything and the amount of hate and criticism that exists on Reddit, on TikTok, YouTube, wherever, and the negativity and comments and the polarization is because many people have rejected their own creativity. They've never actually released a creative contribution into the world. Shit posting on Reddit is not a life. It's nothing. It's literally going out into the ether and gets out no creative energy. And anyone can learn logic. Anyone can be a logic bro and be reductive and apply that framing of reality to any problem. People have been doing that forever. It's like, here's your gold star. Like, great job, man. But when you don't connect with we could say the inner feminine, the inner creativity, especially as a man, problems start to occur. And as you go through life, you have health problems, relationship problems. No one wants to be around you. Maybe your lover doesn't necessarily die, but there's a metaphorical death because people don't want to be with you. If you can't connect and speak to women and be intimate and do these things, then it's just going to be a litany of problems throughout your entire life. And it's mostly because you don't have this divine purpose. You haven't put out this kind of creative energy and respected it, no matter what it is. People are scared of cancel culture. People are honestly scared of what's going to happen in judgment because so many of you guys listening right now all of you guys have the ability to at least release something on Substack, write something on Instagram, say something online and put yourself out there with the name, my name is Ian Kalanak and this is what I believe. But instead we hide behind online personas on websites that we don't control in these just kind of the vast wasteland outskirts of the internet, or just not at all, or just don't participate and be a total, anon. And if you guys would like to join a positive platform that has a writing group and encourages you to read and release your writing no matter what you think people will think, over on the Right Conscious Substack, I have a writing group, a book club, a Cormac McCarthy course, a David Foster Wallace course, and now a course on Gravity's Rainbow that I am going to be building every single week. In the Right Conscious Book Club, we are currently reading 11 books, which include Gravity's Rainbow, 3 Cormac McCarthy novels, a William T. Vollmann novel, a Bolaño novel, and so many more. And so if you don't have any money, I release free writing on Substack every single week. I have free videos over there. But if you want to be held accountable as a writer, as a reader, to meet with me every single day in my daily office hours and ask me questions or get support over email or in a weekly discussion post, I would love to have you over there. And if you can't afford it, that is okay, because I'm going to continue making videos on Pynchon and all my other favorite writers. And if you want to join, the link is down in the description below with all the other links I have mentioned. And so that creativity is just being stifled and people are scared. What, I'm going to get judged. What are people going to say? People are going to say this and that. And maybe they will say this or that, but it's not the end of the world. And by being creative, you can nourish the world. You can build the world. And it doesn't matter what people say. People on all across the internet talk crap about me, but I show up every single day and speak online. Speak about authors and elevate them. I go to my job as an English teacher and help, hundreds of kids a year get deeper into reading and writing with positive and good energy and encouragement and connection. Then I go home and, connect with my wife and my cats, and I try to keep that positivity going and that creativity going. And that's what I personally think at some level. I know Frankenstein's about a lot of things, but I connect this whole theory to Derrida, Foucault, German idealism, nature, Carl Jung, Otto Rank, a ton of other things. I'll probably put that link down in the description below if you guys want to go and read that. And what's funny about this theory, it's actually how I met my wife. We were in a university class together and we had to give a presentation to the class, and we were reading Frankenstein. And I got up there and I explained this whole theory, and the whole class had an uproar. It was a bunch of just logic pros like, oh my God. And like, what are you talking about? Victor's not a genius. Victor's a terrible person. And like, they went crazy on me. But my wife, she was sitting there and smiling at me and nodding her head and like encouraging me. And that eventually gave me the confidence to go and talk to her. And now we've been married for 5 years. So shout out Victor Frankenstein. And maybe I'm not right. Maybe you can sit inside and be a logic pro and have, be a shrewd, but it's fun. I want to be around people who are positive and nourishing. And if I got up there and was a logic pro and went all meta on everyone and was breaking down everyone's points, I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have a beautiful life like I do now. I'd be a hollow shell. So returning to Pynchon. And so Pynchon talks about Frankenstein and another novel, The Castle of Otranto, I think it's pronounced, by Horace Walpole. And I haven't read that. If anybody has read that and would like to explicate on how it relates to this essay or any further thoughts that Pynchon probably didn't want to put out. I mean, this isn't the longest essay in the world also. I think that, Pynchon going out on a limb here and writing nonfiction was kind of a big deal for him. And he didn't want to, it was a New York Times article, so he doesn't have, 80 pages to just rant. But I also think that, much like McCarthy with his Kukule problem, that it must have felt a little bit weird to be speaking as himself. And so after these books, there was a craze for Gothic fiction. And Pynchon says, quote, I suspect in deep and religious yearnings for that earlier mythical time which had come to be known as the Age of Miracles, in more ways and less literal, folks in the 18th century believed that once upon a time, all kinds of things had been possible which were no longer so. Giants, dragons, spells. The laws of nature had been not so strictly formulated back then. What had once been true working magic had, by the age of reason, degenerated into mere machinery. Blake's dark satanic mills represented an old magic that, like Satan, had fallen from grace. As religion was being more and more secularized into deism and non-belief, the abiding human hunger for evidence of God and afterlife, for salvation, bodily resurrection, if possible, remained. And if we look at the turn of the 19th, turn into the 20th century, and Pynchon mentions like the radicalism and the fascism, Freemasonry, Methodism. We could throw Mormonism in there. They are all bizarre. To say it lightly, offshoots of, Christianity or occultism or whatever. And deeper moves into the irrational, but were a defense mechanism against, as Pynchon says, the emerging technopolitical order. Freemasonry had initiation rites. Mormonism was based off of Freemasonry and is very kind of Luddite anti-technology. And 62% of Americans are still, identify as Christians. And salvation, bodily resurrection, God, the afterlife, that hunger is still, you guys already know, it's still deep in so many different people. And a lot of us can't escape it. And this is what I love about modern society is that, I get on here and I poke fun at the Christians all the time. But I'm involved in paganism and the occult and believe in some wonky things. I also love to get immersed into fictional novels and live in fantasy and contemplate all these differing realities and like take myself outside of it and imagine myself as these different people or as immortal or like all these different things. Like that's what we do. We're imaginative people. And this is our Luddism, our neo-Luddism, one could say, pushing against technology. And Pynchon writes that, quote, to insist on the miraculous is to deny the machine at least some of its claims on us, to assert the limited wish that living things, earthly and otherwise, may on occasion become bad and big enough to take part in transcendent doings. And this is such a powerful quote because here I am on the channel all the time, and I make fun of the neo-Luddites. The guys, I don't want to market on TikTok. I want to keep my identity anonymous. But if enough of those guys got serious, they could push back very heavily on technology with, infrastructure and stuff. If we, not to promote anarchism or anything like that, but if people started, blowing up, data centers and all this stuff, we can make an impact really fast on how people use technology. Even though the military industrial complex has got into a point, and with AI, and we're going to talk about all that in a second, that, it would be really hard for us to accomplish that, and it gets harder every single year. We still can do that. But my problem with the neo-Luddites, with the guys who are like that, is they don't do anything. but they actually do a lot. I would love to see some real hermits and Luddites in the writing community. I think of Tu Fu, Cold Mountain, Han Shan, all the Chinese poets who were hermits, Ikkyu, all the, Zen poets, even Henry David Thoreau and so many others. Ted Kaczynski, just joking. But not really, because they all actually removed themselves away from society. I know all these people who don't want to participate and want to do it, do the old ways, are still watching me on YouTube right now, are still going and working a job and living a life and using technology and basically engaging in the entire game. And they're not real hermits. They're not real recluses. They're a joke. They're just cowards. They're just weak. I'm sorry. And Pynchon makes some beautiful points about the different genres of fiction, because Gothic novels were seen as not serious enough of literature by kind of the more literary brow individuals. Same with Westerns, romances, and they're all labeled as escapist fares, but there are books out there like Blood Meridian, like The Notebook. Oh, wait, sorry. Just joking. But a book like Revolutionary Road for Romance, and plenty other of genre works that are some of the best pieces of literature ever created. And Pynchon focuses on science fiction because it's the synthesis, of the two cultures, of the literary and the technological, as we were talking about in Snow's lecture earlier. And World War II created an explosion in scientific because of the evil nature of the Manhattan Project. The Industrial Revolution, science, these things had finally resulted in weapons that could destroy the world. And in a rejection of the nuclear age, science fiction writers in the atomic age, Pynchon writes, quote, "So in the science fiction of the atomic age and the Cold War, we see the Luddite impulse to deny the machine taking a different direction. The hardware angle got de-emphasized in favor of more humanistic concerns, exotic cultural evolutions and social scenarios, paradoxes and games with space, time, wild philosophical questions. Most of it sharing, as the critical literature has amply discussed, a definition of human as particularly distinguished from machine. Like their earlier counterparts, 20th century Luddites look back yearningly to another age, curiously the age of reason, which had forced the first Luddites into nostalgia for the age of miracles." And, one of the most popular science fiction novels ever, and which experienced a massive revival in the last couple of years, is Frank Herbert's Dune. And if you guys remember, in the Butlerian Jihad in Dune, all machines were wiped out and mentats were, talented individuals were turned into human computational computers. And this is a science fiction that I enjoy. Social scenarios, paradoxes, philosophical questions. Like when you look at Dune 4 with Leto II with the philosophical questions. In Dunes 5 and 6, the paradoxes and games with space and time, with the return of the scattering, cultural evolutions as we see in Dune with the different groups, 10,000 years, I think, or so after modern day. And, I'm not going to spoil anything for you guys, but, all of that is really why Dune is so successful. It is science fiction, does have fantastical elements, but that's what it's dealing with. And it was written in the post-World War II age with a focus on environmentalism and politics, religion, and at some level, a push against technology. But Pynchon asks, in the computer age and now in the internet age and the social media age, what outlook is there for the Luddite sensibility? All of you guys own phones. All of you guys are on computers. All of us are connected. None of us are pushing back. And Pynchon makes a great point that Luddites today, if in the past, we're looking for these miracles, looking back to the fantastic, whether it was, the Mormons or the earlier Luddites, the official Luddites, or science fiction authors kind of transplanting themselves in time, looking for these miracles, looking for these ideas, living in fantasy. Well, now with technology and now with blossoming AI, we can start to experience those miracles. We can live in a society maybe without cancer, without these problems. Can denuclearify and finally connect with each other through social media, even though all that is seemingly, not the most probable thing. All of that is possible and can happen. And the way we're going to get there, though, is kind of a communion. The Luddites are going to have to commune with the technological side. And, as we've been trying to attempt at going back to Snow's essay for a long time, we've been trying to integrate the engineering types, the scientific types with ethics. I was in a philosophy program, and there was this big, the whole philosophy program at the university I went to got their funding from these classes like ethics for computer scientists, ethics for lawyers, ethics for engineers, and they would make everyone in the law school or the STEM programs take a philosophy class on ethics. But my buddy and I took one of those classes for fun because it counted, toward our philosophy credits, and the amount of logic and reductivism and what was actually learned in those classes, and if you talk to the professors, absolutely zero. When you go and talk, and I'm just talking about on the ground, and I know I'm making generalizations, and there's great computer scientists and great engineers, and there are all these people, but in general, the ones I've met, and when I talk to the other people and about the people they are dealing with, they aren't necessarily concerned with ethics. They, most of the time, have slipped into moral relativism, maybe even solipsism, materialism, and for sure, across the board, reject objective values, which a lot of people have problems with, and I have problems with objective values too, at a philosophical level. But the only way we can pull things together and can come together is if we all do start believing in objective values, unless you want to believe in just one big government that's going to force us to believe in objective values. Either, we're forced and coerced and, through punishment or technological control into objective values, or we have to all agree upon them and live them out and believe that they are true. Because if you don't believe they are true and rooted in an axiomatic a priori function, then people are going to start slipping up. And I'm not religious, but that is the most important thing in our society. That is the most important way we can push back against technology, is to go back to the objective a priori values and laws of the universe that may or may not exist. But when you start arguing with the Reddit nerds, with the STEM people about objective values, and oh my God, and it's like, oh my God, we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to be taken by technology, by AI, because we can't even figure this out. It's taken us how many millennia to continue to fail to keep our hands to ourselves. Even in the school system that I'm a part of, we still have kids just beating the shit out of each other, parents beating students, people getting mad over disrespect as teenagers, as adults. And even though we were told at a young age and hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on our K through 12 education by American taxpayers, we were never able to learn the lesson as a collective very well to keep our hands to ourselves. And Pynchon writes about this. He quotes Dwight D. Eisenhower in his famous speech while leaving office about the military-industrial complex. And Pynchon gets something wrong, though. He says that because of the data revolution, it becomes every day less possible to fool any of the people any of the time. But if we look at Baudrillardian, ideas of hyper reality, now there's so much information, there's so much diversion and trauma and fragmentation of the consciousness, and as I talked about in my other Pynchon video, a lack of initiatory rights, especially for men, that we have no idea what to do with the data. We turn upon ourselves, we turn upon others, because we were never disciplined in a community and developed empathy and all that type of stuff. And Pynchon predicts that artificial intelligence is going to, the brass is going to be caught flat-footed. They were not caught flat-footed. Google, integrated AI. Meta, integrated AI. Everyone's integrated AI. The government. Know who's flat-footed? We are still flat-footed, being neo-luddites and not doing anything. Like I said, I don't care what direction you go, but walk the walk and use technology to nourish and improve the world, or leave, quit, get out of here. Reject technology completely and be an advocate that way. It's like a heroin addict, it's like a person who is like, okay, imagine a bunch of heroin addicts who are at an Narcotics Anonymous meeting and they're trying to quit. And their leader up there is injecting heroin, but I'm only injecting a little bit. I got a cell phone because I need it for this. Even though people survived all throughout time without technology, even into the late 20th century, and people all around the world still do too. I'm okay. I'm just taking a little heroin. Be authentic, be real. If you want to talk about anti-technology, then either stop being such a pussy and turn off your phone, little boy, or get involved. Do something. Build, grow, nourish, stop destroying. And this is even crazier. This is going to blow some people's minds. This is where a lot of people, we just talked about objective values. Miracles, and this is coming from a non-Christian, do exist, but you're going to have two different parts of your life. You're going to have the technological part if you want to participate in that. But you also need to spend a ton of time in nature. You need to go out there, everyone, and contemplate, meditate, go internally, vision quest, whatever. And you will find the miracles. Water won't turn into wine, but transfiguration of the soul is possible. And I would love to see you guys do that. I would love to see you guys shift from destroying the world, destroying people, destroying everything, reducing everything to building everything. And thank you guys for being here. And I hope to see you in all the Pynchon content, that is coming soon. Peace.